Pan Am was the first company to regularly schedule round-the-world flights that stopped at multiple cities over a space of several days before returning to the airport where they had begun. It gave people the chance to take in stopovers across most continents and was heralded as the height of what air travel could offer. That was until the fated Pan Am Flight 7, which departed San Francisco on the first leg of the flight to Honolulu in Hawaii on the 8th of November 1957. The Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, which was called Clipper Romance of the Skies, took off without any problems, and for the first part of the flight, everything went to plan. Something went catastrophically wrong, however, because the flight crew stopped communicating over the radio. There hadn't been any emergency messages, so for a while it was hoped that it was just a signal fault. But 9 hours after their last transmission, when their fuel would have run out, there still hadn't been any sign of the plane, so a rescue effort was launched. It became the largest search and rescue mission to have ever been conducted in the Pacific Ocean at the time, and it took a week before the wreckage and the bodies of 19 of the 44 passengers were found, around 900 miles to the northeast of Honolulu. There were a number of investigations to try to explain what had happened, but there was such a lack of evidence that no conclusions could be reached. There were suggestions that it could have been sabotage, poor maintenance, or a fire, but these were mere speculation, and the true cause will probably never be known. Number 9. The 1956 B-47 disappearance. While most instances where planes have disappeared are tragic because of the loss of life, there's one aviation mystery that has a potential for far wider destruction and could still pose a risk to this day. On March 10, 1956, a U.S. military Boeing B-47 Stratojet took off from MacDill Air Force Base in Florida with 3 crewmen aboard. Its destination was the Ben Guerir Air Base in Morocco, which was further than the plane's maximum range, so required 2 aerial refuelings. The first went without any problem, but the second was scheduled to take place over the Mediterranean Sea. The tanker plane made visual contact with the B-47, but they flew beneath cloud cover, so the B-47 began to descend through it to refuel. Bizarrely, the plane never emerged beneath the cloud cover and was never seen again. The reason why this was such an important event is because the B-47 had been carrying 2 capsules that contained material for a nuclear weapon, and while there was no risk that it would detonate, it could certainly be used to make a deadly weapon if it fell into the wrong hands. Still, no trace has ever been found of what happened to the plane or crew, and it's hoped that in the best-case scenario, the wreckage, along with the nuclear material, is lying at the bottom of the sea. BSAA Stardust. The friends and family of people involved in aviation mysteries often have to come to terms with the fact that they'll never find out what happened to their loved ones. The case of the BSAA Stardust should give them hope, though, because it was a mystery that remained unsolved for more than 50 years. But despite the wreckage now having been found, there are still plenty of questions about what happened. On August 2, 1947, a British South American Airways flight took off from Buenos Aires in Argentina and was scheduled to arrive in Santiago, Chile a few hours later. The plane, known as Stardust, was an Avro 691 Lancastrian and had 11 people on board, including the crew. But as it was crossing the Argentine Andes, it crashed into Mount Tupungado. The last message received from the plane before it disappeared was in Morse code, and it spelled out the letters STENDEC twice. And to this day, nobody knows what that was intended to mean. A large-scale recovery operation was sent along the flight path to recover the plane and any survivors, but they couldn't find any trace of it. It was only in 1998, when 2 climbers were scaling the mountain, that the wreckage was finally found. And even then, it wasn't exactly clear how the plane had crashed. It seems as if the propeller was rotating at cruising speed at the time of impact, so it's possible they thought they had cleared the mountain range and descended into the peak and hit a snowdrift. But this wouldn't explain the mysterious messages that were sent. Exactly what happened, we'll probably never know for sure, but at least the bodies of those on board were finally recovered. Number 7. TWA Flight 800. On July 17, 1996, Trans World Airlines Flight 800 exploded in midair just 12 minutes after taking off from JFK Airport in New York, with the loss of all 230 people on board. It was the 3rd deadliest aircraft accident in U.S. history and led to one of the most comprehensive air crash investigations to ever be undertaken. But despite this, the true cause has never been established. Incidents like this, once a plane has reached cruising altitude, are incredibly rare, so suspicions soon arose that it was an act of terrorism or sabotage. This meant that the FBI and Joint Terrorism Task Force were involved in the investigation at every step, along with the NTSB. Although 16 months after the incident, they announced that there was no sign of foul play. Instead, the leading theory is that a short circuit ignited fuel vapors from the central fuel tank, something that led to new rules about how they need to be insulated on planes that carry passengers. But this is just still a theory and hasn't been conclusively proven. Other suggestions are that the plane was structurally weakened somehow, so it broke apart during a storm. And there are still suspicions something untoward happened, with traces of explosives being found on 3 pieces of debris. Number 6. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. On March 16, 1962, Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 departed from Travis Air Force Base in California to Saigon in Vietnam, but it would never make it to its intended destination. The Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation prop liner had been chartered by the U.S. military to transport 93 soldiers and 3 locals to Vietnam, but the last anyone saw of them was when it stopped to refuel in Guam. The pilot sent a message to check in 80 minutes after departure, but when the radio operator in Guam tried to get in touch an hour later, there was no response. A few hours later, after the plane's fuel load would have run out, a large-scale search and rescue mission was launched, which saw aircraft and ships covering 2,000 square miles of ocean over the next 7 days. Despite this effort, no trace of the plane has ever been found, and the only clue as to what happened was a report by a tanker whose crew saw an explosion in the air. It's therefore thought that for some reason the plane suffered from an in-flight explosion, but with no wreckage to analyze the mystery of what happened to Flight 739. Number 3. Helios Airways Flight 552. On August 14, 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 was preparing for departure from Lamarca Airport in Cyprus, just like any other day. But this would be the last time this particular plane would taxi down to the runway, because it would never make it to its intended destination in Athens, Greece, in what would become the worst aviation disaster in Greek history. The last contact with any of the crew on board was 20 minutes into the flight, but it would be almost another 3 hours till the crash actually happened. This was enough time for fighter jets to be scrambled and locate the plane in the air, and the pilots reported seeing the co-pilot slumped over his controls, with a deployed oxygen mask hanging above him. This would suggest that the plane lost pressurization for some reason, and it was so sudden that no one on board had a chance to attach their masks before they fell unconscious. There was nothing anyone could do, and the plane simply burned all of its fuel before crashing into the ground and killing everyone on board. The question remains, though, what could have caused it? There were suggestions it was to do with a faulty door that had only recently been fixed by engineers, or a structural weakness in the plane's fuselage. But the wreckage was so badly burned in the post-crash fire that the actual cause was impossible to determine. All the black box recorders showed was the heroic attempts by one of the flight attendants to awaken the pilots, but his attempts ultimately proved to be in vain. Number 2. Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart was one of the most well-known celebrities of her time, having spearheaded advances in aviation and leading to the formation of the 99s, which was an organization dedicated to assisting female pilots. She set numerous world records, such as being the first female passenger to cross the Atlantic by plane and completing the first transatlantic flight by a female. But she was far from done. Her next challenge was to circumnavigate the world by plane, and it was during this attempt that she and her navigator disappeared. They were flying a Lockheed Electra 10E and were on a leg between Lae Airfield in Papua New Guinea and Howland Island, where they would take a break before continuing on to Hawaii. This was the longest leg of their planned route and took the plane to its absolute limits. They almost made it too, but something happened while they were approaching Howland Island, and they disappeared forever, in what is one of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time. There has been speculation that they crashed into the ocean, that they actually landed on another island where they lived out the rest of their lives, or that they were even captured by the Japanese and kept as prisoners. We may never know exactly what happened to Earhart, but her story is probably responsible for inspiring countless people to take to the skies even to this day. Number 1. Malaysian Airlines MH370. Flight disasters are thankfully extremely rare, so when they do happen, it's usually not long before the wreckage is found so investigators can determine what happened to prevent it from occurring again. But there's one mystery from recent times that continues to baffle people the world over: Malaysian Airlines Flight MH370. It took off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport on a journey to Beijing in China, but after last communicating with the ground around 38 minutes into the flight, while they were over the South China Sea, the plane vanished from radar and was never seen again. Despite searching more than 46,000 square miles of ocean over the following years, the answer to this mystery seems further away than ever. Several pieces of wreckage have been found washed up on shore as far away as Madagascar, and because it's such a high-profile event, there are countless theories to explain what happened to the plane and the 239 people on board. Was it shut down? Was it hijacked? And could it have possibly landed somewhere else entirely? Or was there a malfunction, perhaps with the autopilot, that steered it in an unpredictable direction, which it continued along until the fuel ran out? With search attempts currently on hiatus until investigators can further narrow down the possible locations of the wreckage, it seems like it'll be a long time before this mystery is finally solved. Chances are that one day the remains of MH370 will be found, though, and it's hoped that it'll only be a matter of years before this happens, so the families of those on board get some degree of closure.